talk about some basic information about bats, go through our bat monitoring and conservation activities. I'll talk about some of the bat species of Illinois, and then what you can do, and with some questions. So I am the project coordinator for the Illinois Bat Conservation Program, and I started working with bats in 2008. I actually started out in Utah. So some basics about bats. They all belong to the order Chiroptera, which means hand wing. And I think it's really cool to look at the bone structure of their wings compared to our hands and arms. And you can see it's a lot more similar to us than it is to birds. And that's because we're more closely related as mammals. Bats have a really incredible diversity within the order. So here in Illinois and in North America, we don't have a ton of diversity, but worldwide, you can find bats that eat all kinds of different prey and live in all kinds of different.
Yeah, I think I'm hard to hear this. I don't know how to.
Some benefits of bats. So they prey on pest insects, which I think most of us are familiar with. And we especially appreciate that they eat mosquitoes. We don't know how much they may be actually controlling mosquito populations, but we do know that they consume them. And then I think in Illinois, what's really neat and beneficial is that they eat a lot of agricultural pests. So the value to the global corn industry is roughly about $1 billion per year that bats are contributing by consuming agricultural pests. But I like to note that not all bat species will use ag fields. So what are some threats to bat populations? Disturbance to hibernacula is a big one. And then also urbanization, the expansion of wind energy, and then white nose syndrome is the big one, especially here in the Midwest. So white nose syndrome is a fungus that grows on bats' noses and wings, and it causes them to wake up out of hibernation. It was first found out in New York and has really been slowly spreading across the country, partially probably by bats and then partially probably by humans. Bats probably couldn't make it, all the way out to Washington State on their own. And it's caused really high mortality in our hibernating species of bats. And it's been a really big issue. And then we're also dealing with the expansion of wind energy. For some reason, bats seem to be kind of attracted to these wind turbines. We're seeing really high mortality of bats. And this is mostly the migratory species of bats, so different than the ones impacted by white nose syndrome. But there is a lot of research going into this and trying to figure out how we can have clean energy and bats coexist. All energy has some environmental cost, so really just trying to find that balance at this time. So there's also a lot of misinformation about bats, and I'd like to show this graph. In South America, Africa, Asia, island countries, intentional killing of bats is the highest percentage of mortality events. And so I think it's really important to spread positive information about bats. However, I do always like to cover what to do if you find a bat. And we're about to approach migration season in the spring. So spring and fall is when bats are migrating. And they're moving these really long distances, and they can get really tired, especially in the spring. They've already gone through hibernation. And so they probably have really low fat stores, and they just get exhausted and end up in some strange places. If you can, avoiding disturbing them is ideal. You can just let them be and let them rest. For the sake of human safety, if you have to move it, you can either call public health, which they typically will euthanize the bat, or use a box, thick leather gloves to move it to a safe place, preferably off the ground. If you have a bat in your house, ideally you can get them to leave through a door or window, trying not to lose sight of it, or try to contain it in a box and then take it outside. A lot of bats can actually take off from the ground. So if you put it on the ground, it's going to have to crawl and look for something to crawl up. If you can actually put it on like a shed or a tree branch, they can then hang upside down and get into flight. And then if you really have a bat issue, you can obviously contact a bat biologist for more information, but these one-way doors with netting can be helpful. So our Illinois Bat Conservation Program was started in 2016, and the goal was really to fill knowledge gaps about bats in Illinois. So we're trying to identify species distributions, looking at seasonal movement patterns, locating maternity colonies, trying to understand population genetics post-white nose syndrome, and then also looking at diet preferences of different bat species. This is the State of the Bats report put out by Bat Conservation International. And I think the headline really identifies what we're trying to do. So conservation works best when people are empowered with data. And so by providing a lot of data to our partners at IDNR, the NA Bat program, Fish and Wildlife Service, they can make some of those higher level decisions based on data. So the Illinois Bat Conservation Program, we use a lot of variety of methods because bats are out at night, they're cryptic, they're small. So in order to get a really good data set, we have to use a lot of different methods. So we do emergence counts at roost, we do mist netting, radiotelemetry, guano collection and metabarcoding, and acoustics. So with our acoustics, we're following the North American Bat Monitoring Program, which we use a generalized random tessellation stratified sampling method, which we shortened to grits. So we do 30 grits throughout the state. Within each grits, we do 2 to 4 stationary points, and then we also drive a mobile transect with a recorder out of the car and record bats that way. This is what our mobile data looks like. So we end up with this map, and we can see where we've detected bats along the route. On this one, you can see on the right-hand side, it's mostly ag fields. We're not actually detecting a ton of bats there. On the left-hand side, there's a lot more forest and creeks, and we are detecting quite a few bats. Lots of big browns on that side. Whereas the stationary recorder is just sitting in one place. With the mobile data, we are able to survey a lot more land cover and a lot more areas. And so that's where the paired method gives us a little bit more data. This is a passive survey method, so we're just recording free-flying bats. And we end up collecting a ton of data this way. So we usually put these out for a few nights, and we can end up with thousands of files of that acoustic data after just a few nights. So we actually run it all through software programs. One of them we use is Sonobat. We also use Kaleidoscope, and that helps to identify bat species and kind of narrow down what we're looking at. It's using call pulse parameters. So on this diagram from Sonobat, you can see at the bottom, there's the high frequency, low frequency, duration of the call, and there's a lot of different parameters that the program is looking at, and that's how it's trying to identify what species it is. We do some manual review where we're actually looking back and verifying what the program decided is correct. And that's because humans are actually better at pattern recognition than computers. And so there's still something we're good at. And it is helpful for us to review some of those, especially for threatened and endangered species. Some bat echolocation basics. So a small bat is likely going to be going after smaller prey. So they're more likely to use a high frequency echolocation call, whereas a larger bat is most likely going to be looking for larger prey. So they're more likely to use a low frequency sound that would be passed over to smaller prey items. What's interesting about this too is high frequency sounds are going to dissipate in the environment faster, whereas low frequency sounds are actually going to travel further. And another issue with the acoustics is that, if you're in a forest, there's obviously vegetation that can impact the acoustics as well. So is acoustics the magic bullet for bat surveys? It's really helpful and it really gives us a lot of data. But species specific, it can be challenging to ID some of these, and it's just not really suited for some of our species. So we have to also use some other methods. So we also do mist netting, where we're actually catching bats for species identification. One of the issues with mist netting is that we really can only successfully do it on flight corridors. So old roads or creeks where the bats are kind of funneled into the nets. They're very smart. They're great at evading our nets. So we have to choose the site locations we have to be pretty particular about that. But when we have a bat in hand, we can collect age, sex, and reproductive status information, which is really useful when we're looking at these populations. And then we're also able, when we have a bat in hand, to track the bat to its roost tree. And these roost trees are really important. In the summer, the female bats from some of our species are going to create maternity colonies where it's sometimes hundreds of female bats, and bats require really specific temperature requirements for raising their young and for the young to develop. And so these roost trees can be very important. And when we find them, we are able to offer some protections for those roost trees. So finding them is really helpful. Here's a picture of what it looks like. So we have a little radio telemetry tag that we attach to the bat with glue that actually falls off after 3 to 7 days. And we use our antennas to go out and track the bat during the day and find out where it's roosting. And we mostly do this for our threatened and endangered species, or some of these species that are up for review right now. So once we find a roost tree, we're commonly going to do an emergence count that evening, and that's where we just sit out at sunset and we're watching the bats as they fly out and counting them, so we get an idea of how popular this roost tree is. So, oops, it didn't play. Here's a video of one. So we're trying to track bats that are leaving when they're coming back. Sometimes they'll go back and be social and then go back out again. And so we're trying our best to count those. We've also been doing a lot more with genetics lately. So we've been collecting genetic samples to get a better understanding of bat diet when we were collecting guano samples. We were also collecting insects using bucket traps for a while to see what insects are available in the environment and what are the bats eating. And so we've been able to collect some data this way as well. We can also verify the species of bat that we had caught with the guano samples as well. So with the guano, these were some of our preliminary results, and there were some that was exactly what we were expecting: stink bugs and moths, mosquitoes, and then there were some unexpected results like white-tailed deer and human DNA. And so that was really neat because we realized these bats were eating mosquitoes that had genetic material in the blood from white-tailed deer and humans, and we were able to pick that up when we were analyzing the DNA, which is really neat. Something that we're newly developing is we're trying to develop a Midwest bat repository. So at a lot of these wind farms, they have to do surveys for birds and bats. And when they find bats, they typically have to freeze them or keep them for some amount of time. And so there's a lot of consulting firms with frozen bats across the Midwest. And we decided it'd be great if we could use some of these specimens for research. And so we have started having some of these bats come to the Illinois Natural History Survey. Some become part of our mammal collection, and some are brought in for genetic research. Some of the research we've been able to do, and we've been using pre-white nose syndrome bats from, we have a rabies surveillance collection as well here. And then mostly post-white nose syndrome bats have been from the wind farms. And we are able to look at things like genetic diversity. So pre and post white nose syndrome, if we see these really big declines in populations, is that impacting the genetic pool? And some of the ones that have been flagged so far, the hoary bats actually, which are not impacted by white nose, they are impacted by the wind turbines. And then little browns and northern long-eared bats have shown some differences in genetic populations. And then this work was done by our grad student, Jordan Chase, and she's also looked at the inbreeding coefficient, and the little brown bats is very high. So as these populations get smaller, they're more likely to inbreed, and then that coefficient gets higher. So getting into our bats of Illinois, there's can be about 14 species found. At the bottom, the Mexican free-tailed bat is unlikely to be found here, but there have been a few instances where they've been observed here in Illinois. Then the next three are, those abbreviations are state endangered and state threatened. A lot of these are found mostly in southern Illinois, and they're pretty uncommon, judging by their listing. So I'm not going to talk about those ones. I'm going to focus on the more common species. So we have these three species. These are all federally endangered, and I'm going to run through these quickly. The northern long-eared bat is recently listed as endangered. So I'm going to show you a bunch of these species maps, and they can be a little bit confusing, so I just wanted to run through quickly how to interpret them. So a gray circle is no acoustic detection for that species. A yellow circle means there is a positive acoustic detection. A larger circle means more calls. Smaller circle is less calls. And then the triangles, black is no mistnet captures, and the purple is positive mistnet captures. So for the northern long-eared bat, they're highly impacted by white nose syndrome and recently uplisted to endangered. Historically, one of the more common bats of Illinois, but we only had one capture by IDCP since 2016, and that was up in the Chicago area. So you can also see there's very low acoustic detection for this species, and so I'm not quite sure what's going on with this one in Illinois. It seems to be pretty uncommon now. The Indiana bat, again, highly impacted by white nose syndrome, but they've actually been federally listed as endangered since 1967. And that's because they are really impacted by disturbance. So they were actually listed because of disturbance with hibernacula, but they're not historically found in every county in Illinois. So they've never been located up in the Chicagoland area. Not to say with climate change that might not change, but we see them more in central and southern Illinois. And I want to point out, this is an endangered species, and you can see we're still actually catching them quite frequently with our mistnetting. So the next group I'm going to talk about are our consideration for federal listing. So the tricolored bat and little brown bat are currently under review by Fish and Wildlife. The little brown bat is also highly impacted by white nose syndrome. It's historically one of the most common bats of Illinois. It used to be one that was really commonly found in people's homes and attics and barns. It's very acoustically similar to the Indiana bat, so that's one of those ones that can get confusing with the acoustics. But you can see we're really not catching them with the mistnetting very often. So we've caught a few recently, but definitely not more than 5. Before we only caught 3. The tricolored bat is one of the smallest bats we have in Illinois. So you can see in my hand in this photo, it's just teeny tiny. Historically found throughout the state, but not probably a super common one. And this one's currently being considered for federal listing. We are still catching them fairly frequently, but definitely not as often as we might expect. The eastern red bat and the hoary bat are our migratory species. And so these are ones that are more commonly found at the wind energy facilities. The red bat is a foliage roosting bat, so it has this reddish color so that when it's hanging by one leg, it looks like a dead leaf, which is really neat. And these ones are very common right now still. So I actually had to increase the scale of my circles because the activity for the acoustics was so high for this species. So lots of big circles of this one, lots of acoustic detections. I actually didn't put the MissNet results on this one, but we are catching them really frequently. The hoary bat is also migratory. It actually has a really low frequency and unique echolocation call that's very long. So it should be easily detected with the acoustics. It's the largest bat in Illinois, so it's actually less likely to be caught in our mist nets because they tend to fly higher than our netting. The silver-haired bat is also migratory, but it does spend the summer typically further north than Illinois, so we don't actually catch them very often, but they are acoustically similar to the big brown. And then the big brown bat, this is our most common bat. Historically, it's a habitat generalist. Now this is the one that we're typically seeing in people's barns and attics. They seem to have a limited impact on white nose syndrome, and we don't know if that's something behavioral or something genetic, but even though they hibernate, they haven't been as impacted. And then, yeah, again, often found in man-made structures. So what can you do for your local bats? And a lot of this is also great for other wildlife. So it's not just bats who'd be helping with some of these tips. But planting a diversity of native plants can be helpful, especially attracting moths. So flowers that are pale white with a night scent. Moths are likely a big part of bats' diet. They're out at night and they're a little bigger and more juicy than a mosquito, offer more calories. So attracting moths to your garden is great. Providing water sources, but making sure you have escape routes, especially if you have a pool or covering it at night. Wildlife can get caught and stuck in pools pretty easily, and with the slick sides, they're not able to get out. These little ramps are actually, you can buy them pretty much anywhere. I pulled this picture, I think, from Walmart's website, so pretty easily available. Reducing dependence on pesticides and herbicides. You know, bats are drinking water. They're flying through and just skimming water off the surface, so making sure they have access to clean water. Keeping cats indoors at night. This is one people don't love to hear, but we do have a lot of data that cats are having a huge impact on wildlife, especially birds and bats. So controlling when they're outside can help reduce fatalities. Keeping cats inside during dawn and dusk can reduce bird fatalities, and at night can reduce bat fatalities. Keeping standing dead trees that don't pose a hazard to humans or property is great for all kinds of wildlife. We have a lot of bats in the state that like to roost up under the bark of trees, like this one in the photo. And so those dead, decaying trees are really great for providing that peeling bark. Turning off lights outside when they're not in use is also helpful for bats. We have some research that shows it can alter their behavior when there's a lot of artificial lighting. And then what can you do to enjoy bats? People tell me all the time they never see bats, they don't have any bats near their house. And I think people just don't spend enough time looking up outside at night. I see bats outside my second floor bathroom window all the time in the summer, leaving the grocery store in the evening. So I highly encourage people to just take that time to look up if you're ever out around sunset. There's also lots of other cool animals that you don't necessarily see or hear during the day that you can see at night. If you know of any kind of roost of bats, we've gotten data from like picnic shelters in public areas, people's barns, anything, where there's some bats, we'd love to hear about it. We have a roost form on our website, IllinoisBats.org. And we're basically trying to, when I give talks like this, I'd always have people say, oh, my cousin has a barn full of bats. And we just really wanted to harness that data somehow. So we have this roost form on our website, and you can fill that out, and we will follow up with you. We've been having people collect guano samples so that we can actually ID what species are using these roosts. And it's been really a neat project to put together. And with that, I can take any questions. This is another little video of bats from a mine. This is what we do in the winter, is going to caves and mines and looking for bats. My email's at the bottom, our website is there at the bottom, and then my Twitter handle if you're on there. But I can take any questions if you want to put in the chat or unmute yourself. I'm happy to answer those.
So any questions from folks? Like she said, feel free to unmute yourself and ask, or put it into the chat.
Will this program be available on your extension to review later again?
Yes, FREP will post this video that we recorded through Zoom on our webpage, and we'll also put a PDF of the PowerPoint up.
I see a question in the chat about getting started working with bats. So I think there's, some opportunities in terms of classes. Taking the mammalogy course is great. And then there are some opportunities through a couple organizations where they offer these like field classes where you go for a week and you can participate in mist netting and acoustics and get hands-on experience with a team that's there to teach, which is really helpful. There's a lot of groups that are happy to bring out volunteers. We occasionally bring volunteers out with our program as well. And then there are a lot of opportunities for jobs where you're doing like the wind energy surveys, and you can kind of just start getting your feet wet with identifying bats. And there's just a lot of jobs doing that right now. Are there any classes or courses for conducting bridge structure bat assessments for construction? There's not that I know of, but I do believe, I got an email recently that they're trying to put together something that's a little bit more of a protocol. I'm not sure where that is in the production process, but I do think they're trying to put something together for that. Because right now it isn't super clear.
There is a standardized form that U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service came out with that I know Illinois Department of Transportation has adopted. So
yeah,
there's at least a form that has become fairly standardized and used. Yeah. But I guess asking about the training on how to use it. Most of us that are doing those assessments are just going out and doing them based on our basic ecological knowledge and what it says on the forms.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually used to work for the Tollway project, so I did a lot of those bridge assessments and overpass assessments. And then also, so our lab, if you go out to a bridge or structure and you do see guano and you're able to collect it, our lab can process that and ID species. So if you do have some opportunities to collect guano at those, you can shoot me an email and I'll actually connect you with our genetics person, but that can be helpful. I know the IDOC group sends us samples occasionally when they want to ID species, because it's not always easy to mist net and get the bats in hand. So,
right.
Are there any solutions in the works for combating white nose syndrome? There's lots of grant opportunities where people have been exploring this. This has been an issue for quite a while. What's difficult is this really impacts bats during the winter when they're hibernating in caves, and it's not easy to, like spray fungicide into a cave because there's other animals that live in these caves. And how does that impact these other species? They have been testing that out in like artificial caves so that they're not impacting other animals or ecosystems. So there's lots of research, and I don't think anything has really been shown to be super helpful at this point, especially in the Midwest. We've kind of gone through the mass mortality phase, unfortunately. And at this time, it's like the populations are just down and we are just kind of waiting for them to rebound. Bats only have one, occasionally two pups per year. So they have a really slow reproductive rate. So to recover from a really high population impact is going to take a really long time. So hopefully we can, like how we think of it as with our project is if we provide conservation, we conserve habitat, hopefully we're supporting these populations as they can rebound. What is the source of white nose disease? So I don't think we're exactly sure, but most likely it came from Europe and was brought on maybe caving equipment or someone's boots, spores. And then it just spread really quickly as you have all these bats hibernating in caves. They also move caves in the winter. So I think it just spread really quickly. How do changing street lights affect bats? I used to always see bats. So I'm not exactly sure how the different types of streetlights might impact bats. I saw a recent publication about why moths are attracted to light, and why bats would be there is because there'd be insects at those lights. And I'm not sure how, as these lights opportunities are changing. I know some of them are actually changing to lower. There's less light. As there's these dark sky initiatives, I think some of these have improved. But I'm not sure how that might affect our urban populations of bats.
Tara, this is Jeremy.
Hi.
Hey, how you doing? I know there was also different frequencies they were looking at, and of course it attracts different insects over from bluer light to red light and whatnot. And then we're also, I think there was some studies out there that, other wildlife are impacted, and it's trying to find that right frequency is almost impossible because everything is impacted by some part of the spectrum. But from what I understand, I want to say red tends to be less moth attractive, but again, that's not necessarily my expertise there, but that's from what I read.
Yeah, I was like, I could probably go back to the page where I had the headlines from.
There it is.
I see if any of these headlines were actually about the different types of light. I don't think so, but I did see a recent publication that came out talking about the different the behavior of the insects at lights. Has there been any genetic testing to see if bats are evolving adaptations to white nose resistance? So that's been part of the research. I think that'd be really neat. Part of that would be, can we isolate what part of the genetic code is related to surviving white nose syndrome? Obviously, there is a small percentage of bats that have been surviving, and what are the traits that they have that has allowed them to persist? And we don't know if some of that, there may be some behavioral aspects, bats that tend to be maybe in the middle of the cluster, or they tend to be closer to the entrance where it's colder of the cave. So kind of teasing out like what behavioral adaptations might be helpful versus is there part of the genetic code that is helping these bats survive? So we could possibly do that, but I think that's something that we would love to do down in the future. Are bats harmed by climate change if they don't end up hibernating as long during shortened or warmer winters? So the impact on hibernation would really depend on the cave. So most of the caves that bats are in are very, it's a standard temperature when you go in year round. So I don't know if climate change would necessarily, maybe they'd be going in later, taking those environmental cues of when to hibernate.
What
I
are
don't know.
their cues for coming out of hibernation? Is that temperature days, or what are the cues for?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. I'm like, well, wait, how did I get the cue to leave?
That's like $1 million question.
Yeah.
Is it? Okay.
Maybe we don't quite know that, because so we actually have, I was going to throw this in the presentation and I didn't, but we have some long-term bat monitoring stations. And we actually have them out at some hibernaculas. And so we're actually recording acoustics as bats are leaving. So, and then we have a weather station there. So we're looking at what weather cues they're taking to enter hibernation versus leaving hibernation. Right. So hopefully that will help us get a little bit of information. But I see someone said they did see a bat the other day. We do see bats leave when the weather is good. So they are getting some cue that the weather is good, because they do leave and move hibernacula, drink water. And typically they're out on, we've had some 60-degree days, 50, 60-degree days. So I'm sure they're taking advantage of those. Do you recommend any handheld acoustic devices for monitoring? So I do help with some community science research, and there are a bunch of groups up in the Chicagoland area that do this as well. The Lincoln Park Zoo has sort of spearheaded it, but it's also happening in lots of different county forest preserves. But we do these walking transects where people are holding an iPad, and then I usually have a microphone on my desk, but you attach this little ultrasonic microphone and you can walk around with it. We typically have them elevated on a painter's pole and collecting data that way. I think that's the most inexpensive and easy way is, if you have an iPhone too, you could plug it in. So the wildlife acoustics echo meter is this little tiny microphone. You can plug it in an iPad or phone and record bats. And it's a great way to get a little bit of data. And then if you want like the protocol for how we've been developing these walking transects, I can send you that. Or if you want to reach out to Liza Lehrer at Lincoln Park Zoo, she's been doing a lot more in the Chicagoland area. So yeah, those can be really, and they're really fun to use in your backyard too.
Any other questions or comments?
Or Jeremy, if you have anything else to add, clarification.
Oh no, I'm not gonna do that. But there's no, like absolutely wonderful information, obviously. But something that you like, if I wouldn't be able to bring the Illinois, like the state data that you have. There was no, I can't share my data. I'm a consultant, so that's good.
Yeah, we upload all of our acoustic data on an bat portal. We connect everything with Fish and Wildlife, and then this access to the carcasses has been really great. I think historically people didn't want to share those, but we have been getting those in really big quantities. So we have lots and lots of freezers here now of bats, but it's been great for that genetic research and looking at what are we seeing pre and post white nose syndrome? And we're not going to go out and collect bats that are alive. So if these bats have already, died, then we can use that data, and it's really helpful. So, and a great resource. And again, I can.
I did think of one thing. I know Illinois, there's no bat rehabbing. I don't know if that's worth talking about or not, or that I'm opening up a can of worms, but something to,
Yeah.
if you do find a bat, you unlikely to get it rehabbed in Illinois. So that's a negative, but it's true. So
Yes. I was like, I should add that to the slide about what to do if you find a bat. Yes, there is no rehabbing of bats in Illinois. There's a group that's trying to open up the opportunity for that. I don't think it'll happen anytime soon.
yeah.
But it is sort of a disadvantage in Illinois that if you find an injured bat, especially, just kind of leaving it be and letting nature take its course, unfortunately, as long as it's not, around pets or humans.
But your implication is there is rehabbing in other states?
Oh yeah, most states have some mechanism or statute that allows it. I don't want to go into the. I know some of the reasons why Illinois didn't, but it's not. It's it's just hearsay too. But
I mean,
it's
yeah,
rabies,
I've always heard
rabies
it's
backed. That's
because
why.
it's a rabies. Yeah, it's a state regulation that there's no rehabbing. And I've been told it's because they're a rabies vector. So yeah, our rehab facilities just have to turn them away.
Yeah.
See, I opened up a can. People are asking questions.
Yeah, and that's goofy because there's other mammals that are bigger rabies vectors than bats.
Yeah.
Right.
But
Well, I'm back on the acoustic thing. This is one of the wildlife acoustics song meters, so they're pretty small. This could be described as handheld. This one is a mini song meter, and so it can be used to monitor bats, and the data can be plugged into the Kaleidoscope program that you mentioned. But these are also designed to be used for bird monitoring or frog monitoring or other things. You can use it for a lot of different things, and they might be a pretty versatile thing for, interested citizens and volunteers to use. We use it right now. This one is being used to monitor for state listed frog species in solar farms, so that we don't have to sit out there every evening listening for the frogs. I can program that to record every night, an hour before and after sunset, and then analyze the data, later. I don't have to be sitting out there. So they're kind of handy devices. I don't remember what that cost. They're not cheap, but they're not horrendously expensive either.
Yeah. Yeah, I do have to run. Oh, someone did post about the program Liza Lair is doing.
Yeah, with the
But yeah,
tablet.
thank you for having me.
All right, yeah, thank you so much, Tara. And yeah, if you don't mind, we'll post this video and the PowerPoint. If you can send us your PowerPoint as a PDF. We usually try to post all of our speakers on the FREP webpage so that people can go back and refer to those later, as was asked.
Yeah, sounds great. Well, thank you so much, and shoot me an email if you had follow-up questions that you wanted to ask.
All right, great. Thanks, Tara.
Thank you.
So I guess as we're wrapping up then,
I'm still around if anybody needs me.
If folks have any other questions that Jeremy might be able to answer. He works for Orbis Environmental Consulting out of Northwest Indiana. So it gets into a lot of the bat monitoring that needs to be done for projects. As he said, he's a consultant.
Good program, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, well, hearing no questions, thanks all for joining us, and we hope to see you all at the Fox River Summit up in Burlington, Wisconsin on March 14th at Veterans Terrace in Burlington, Wisconsin. We have a great program put together, and registration is up and live. Thanks all.
Thanks, Jeff.
You bet.
Thank you.